Hi everyone. In this video, we will walk through the process of downloading and installing Android Studio on a Windows PC step by step. Android Studio is the official IDE, integrated development environment for Android app development, providing all the tools needed to design, code, and test Android applications. Okay, firstly, you launch your web browser and navigate to the official Android Studio download page on the Android developer's website. You can simply Google Download Android Studio and click the official link. The site will automatically detect that you're on Windows and show a big Download Android Studio button. Click the Download Android Studio button. This will open the Terms and Conditions, License Agreement page for Android Studio. Scroll through and read the license if you'd like. It's always good to know the terms. To proceed, you must check the box that says, "I have read and agree to the above terms and conditions." Once you've checked the agreement box, click the Download button to start the download of the installer. Your browser will ask you where to save the Android Studio installer, which is in .exe file. Choose a folder that's easy to find later, for example, your Downloads folder, and save the file. The installer file is fairly large, so wait for the download to complete. This might take a few minutes, depending on your internet speed. A good time to grab a coffee or tea while it downloads. Once the download is done, you locate the downloaded Android Studio EXE installer. Double-click the installer file to run it. Then, the Android Studio Setup wizard will launch with a welcome screen. This wizard will guide us through the installation. Here, simply click Next to begin the installation process. The wizard will then ask you to select which components to install. By default, it should have Android Studio, the IDE, selected, and it may also offer to install an Android Virtual Device (AVD) component, the emulator. Leave all default options checked. Ensure that both the Android Studio IDE and the Virtual Device emulator are selected for installation. This will ensure you get the emulator installed, which is useful for testing your apps. After confirming the components, click Next. Next, you'll be asked to choose the installation directory for Android Studio. You can stick with the default path, usually something like C/Program Files Android, Android Studio, unless you have a specific reason to change it. The default location is fine in most cases. Choose a drive with sufficient space. Remember, the SDK and emulator system images can take several GB. After selecting paths, click Next to continue. The wizard might ask what Start menu folder to create shortcuts in. Leaving it as the default Android Studio is usually fine. Click Install to begin the actual installation of files. Now the installer will copy files and set up Android Studio on your system. You'll see a progress bar as files are extracted and installed. This may take a couple of minutes. Let it complete. Once the installation reaches 100%, the wizard will show a Setup Completed or Installation Complete screen. There's often a checkbox like Start Android Studio on this final screen. Make sure that is checked so that Android Studio will launch immediately after we close the installer. Now, click the Finish button to exit the installer and launch Android Studio. Great. At this point, Android Studio itself has been installed. Now, the first time Android Studio runs, it will do some initial setup. This involves a setup wizard inside Android Studio to configure the development environment, like downloading the Android SDK and setting up an emulator. When Android Studio first launches, you might see a prompt asking if you want to import settings from a previous installation. If this is your first time installing, select Do Not Import Settings, or simply ignore this if it doesn't appear, and click OK. Android Studio will then load the initial setup wizard. The Android Studio setup wizard will start. First, it may welcome you and ask you to choose a UI theme for the IDE. You typically have a choice between a light theme or dark theme. Pick whichever you prefer. Dark theme is popular for reducing eye strain. This setting can be changed later, so don't worry too much. After selecting light or dark, click Next. The wizard might ask you to choose the type of setup. For most users, select Standard. Installation. This will apply the recommended settings and install the most common SDK components. Then click Next. Advanced users could choose Custom to pick specific components, but that's not necessary right now. Now, the wizard will download the necessary Android SDK tools, platforms, and emulator files. Basically, Android Studio needs the Android SDK software development kit to build apps, and at least one Android platform, the latest API level, and system image for the emulator. You'll likely see a list of components to download, such as the latest Android SDK platform and emulator system image. These are selected by default in standard mode. Review the list and click Next to begin the download. You may need to accept some licenses for Android SDK components. Just click Accept if prompted. These are licenses for things like Android SDK tools, etc. Android Studio will now download and install the SDK components. This step can take some time, depending on your internet speed, because it might download a few hundred megabytes or more. Please be patient while the components are downloading and installing. You will see progress bars for each component. If it's taking a while, don't cancel it. Let it finish. It's normal for this to take several minutes. Feel free to stretch your legs or grab a drink while you wait. After all components are downloaded and installed, the Setup wizard will display a completion message. Click Finish. Congratulations! You have now finished installing Android Studio and its essential components. The Android Studio program will finally open its welcome screen. At this welcome screen, you have options such as Start a new Android Studio project, Open an existing project, etc. This means your installation was successful. Android Studio is now ready for you to create your first Android app. Okay, all right, guys. We have seen the process of downloading and installing Android Studio on a Windows PC step by step. See you guys in the next lecture.